We are all set and ready to go.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 28, 2021 Delta Stewardship Council. I hope all of you are well and staying dry and have power. It's wonderful that we actually have a healthy storm and it's raining. Let's start with the roll call in alphabetical order, starting with Judge Damrell, and I'll go last.
Damrell here.
Gatto is here.
Moranian's here.
Foley's here.
Tatayan here. We have a quorum. If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment, please send an email blue card to the clerk at engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to comment on. Also, please note if you wish to speak or would like the clerk to read your comment for you. When called, the clerk will unmute you or read your comment if requested.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure I came through on the roll call, but I am here. This is Daniel.
Yes, hi Daniel, we did hear you, thank you. On to agenda item 3, the consent calendar. Members, on the consent calendar today, we have the summary of our December 17 meeting. Is there any public comment on the consent calendar?
There is no public comment.
Okay. Council members, is there a need for any discussion of the consent calendar item?
Move adoption of the consent calendar.
Okay, motion by Judge Damrell. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Maria Moranian. If there are no objections from any of the council members to adopting the consent calendar, or do I hear any objections?
Madam Chair, I may need to abstain. I was not there for that meeting, obviously, with the changeover, so I will abstain from the vote on the minutes for the last meeting. Okay.
Thank you, Don.
Yes.
Well, with that, Don Natoli abstaining and hearing no objections, the motion is adopted. And we'll move on to agenda item 4. So for the chair's report, I want to welcome Don Natoli to the council. For those council members who don't know Don, I really want to highlight that he was part of the inaugural Delta Stewardship Council and worked alongside the very first council for many, 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 many hours to develop the Delta Plan, withstood at least 18 months or more of public meetings. And Don, I just want to thank you for coming back to the council and being willing to serve again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's my pleasure certainly to join you. I think the only person that was serving and had just come on board was Judge Damrell, so I had a chance to serve a few months early in his tenure, and had an opportunity, obviously, to follow the council's activities and certainly your actions. And I know you have a very capable and competent staff, your executive director, and all the folks that assist the council. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for swearing me in last week, and I look forward to the opportunity to work with my colleagues. Obviously, remotely it's a little difficult to know all of you, but I know over the months ahead I'll get a chance to meet you folks in person. I certainly look forward to joining the board, and thank you for your kind welcome.
Certainly, yeah.
Don, this is Daniel. I wanted to welcome you too, but I was hoping we'd get a new member so I would no longer be the only one with a steep learning curve, and on the contrary, you come with this depth of experience. So I'm a little disappointed in that, but welcome anyway.
Thank you, Dan.
Also in the chair's report, I want to share that I had the opportunity to attend the January 21 meeting of the Delta Protection Commission. And I gave the commission members an overview of the council's major efforts in 2020. And Harriet Ross gave an excellent presentation to the commission members about our Delta Adapts work, and that presentation was well received. And yes, it was. She had quite a few questions, enthusiastic questions. Council members, I'd like to give any of the council members an opportunity to offer a brief update, if you'd like, as part of the chair's report. And if not, that's fine. Okay, hearing none, let's move on to agenda item 5, Executive Officer's Report. Jessica Pearson.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, council members, and welcome as well to our new council member, Don Natoli. Looking forward to working with you again.
Thanks, Jessica.
Not sure if other members know this, but in addition to serving now on the council and the chair of the Delta Protection Commission, Don also serves on the Delta Conservancy. So he's got the trifecta of knowledge and experience there, in addition to his county supervisor work in Sacramento. So we're glad to have him.
Thanks, Jessica.
Just a couple announcements here. As a brief reminder, our office continues to be mostly closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff are working remotely and remain available to assist the public. So if anyone needs to contact staff at the council, you're encouraged to email hello@deltacouncil.ca.gov and we will direct you to the appropriate staff person. I also encourage those interested in our public meetings to consistently check our website and sign up for our listserv, where information and updates for our various activities will be posted, including how to participate. There's a very slight chance that I'll lose power during this meeting. My power was out most of yesterday. If so, I'll call back in and endeavor to continue my report, but I just thought I'd issue that warning. Moving on, we've got our Delta Adapts public draft vulnerability assessment now available for public comment. We're very excited about this release. It came out on January 15th. It's available on our website. We had planned on a 30-day public comment period. However, we've already received a few requests for an extension. So we have extended that public comment period to March 16th, 2021. The draft study, as I said, can be found on our website, and also additional supporting technical materials are available as well. To provide comments or to ask any questions of staff or to engage staff members in a conversation about the details, please email climatechange@deltacouncil.ca.gov. I also wanted to take a moment to recognize council staff participation in the Water Education Foundation's Water Leaders Program. The council actually boasts at least, I think we counted 8 alumni from this program, including me. The last year, Corey Copeland from our Planning and Performance Division was selected to participate in the 2020 Water Leaders class. Corey has been a significant contributor to our Delta Adapts effort, also our ecosystem amendment, and he applies his expertise daily to the council's performance measures unit. Each Water Leaders class, the class lasts a year long. Each water leader is assigned a mentor, and then the class is given a vexing water policy topic and charged with developing a recommendations report, and then ultimately presenting that report to the foundation board. The Corey's class produced a climate adaptation recommendations report, which is a timely topic for us. And that report is now available on the Water Education Foundation's website. And for the current year, I'm happy to announce that we'll have another representative in the Water Leaders program. Rachel Klopfenstein from our Delta Science program has been accepted into the 2021 class. Rachel, you've seen at many meetings. She's been instrumental in facilitating the social science task force and the engagement with the council there. And she's demonstrated great leadership in the development of our collaborative science action agenda update. So my congratulations to Corey and Rachel, and I'm so glad that we can continue to contribute to and benefit from this important leadership program. This last month was a busy one in terms of Delta Plan implementation and coordination letters. The council sent 4 letters. The first letter was to the city of West Sacramento regarding their Bees Lake Habitat Restoration Plan and Design Project. This is in southeast West Sacramento near the Little Pocket. The project seeks to restore historic physical and ecological processes to optimize habitat function in the Bees Lake area. And of note, the project's planning and design were funded by the Delta Conservancy's Prop 1 grant program. The second letter is to the Tri-Valley San Joaquin Valley Regional Rail Authority regarding their draft environmental impact report for the Valley Link project. You may remember hearing of this project before, as the council has submitted letters to the authority during various parts of the project's development. The project intends to improve connectivity within Northern California by establishing a rail connection between BART and the Altamont Corridor Express commuter service in the Tri-Valley. So our letter offers comments on the draft EIR, including indicating that the project appears to be a covered action and that they should consider specific details of the Delta Plan and its policies relating to mitigation measures, best available science, ecosystem restoration considerations, Delta's place, and floodplain protection. The third letter is to the San Joaquin Council of Governments, or SJCOG, regarding its notice of preparation of an EIR for their 2022 SJCOG Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. The plan is intended to serve as their long-range transportation plan for their county that links land use, air quality, and transportation needs. The letter to SJCOG encourages early consultation with council staff and outlines the Delta Reform Act's requirements that these types of strategies must be consistent with the Delta Plan and reviewed by the council before final adoption. And finally, the council sent a comment letter to the Delta Protection Commission regarding the update to the Recreation and Tourism chapter of their Economic Sustainability Plan. You'll remember just last month that their executive director, Eric Vink, discussed this update at our council meeting. The comments in our letter highlight changes to the council and council activities since their last update of this document in 2012. We also have some suggestions for how proposed actions and the recent designation of the National Heritage Area could help with recreation and economic considerations, and also how they can align this update with ongoing efforts at the council. If you have any questions about any of these projects or letters, please do not hesitate to let me know, or I always have Jeff Henderson on the line who can answer questions. Okay, moving on, covered action certifications. When we last met on December 10th, the Department of Water Resources has submitted a consistency certification for their Yolo Bypass Salmonid Habitat Restoration and Fish Passage project. The project's review period and appeal period closed on January 11th with no appeals, and so that project can now proceed. Quickly, we have one new hire this month. Veronica Wojek joins the council as a retired annuitant in our Contracts, Procurement, and Business Services unit. This is a particularly busy unit this time of year as we look forward to the close of the fiscal year at the end of June, and as we move forward with our science funding decisions through the PSN. So before retirement, Veronica worked for the state for 24 years with several different departments, including the Department of General Services, Public Health, Consumer Affairs, and Caltrans. So we're welcoming her to our team. In your packet, you have, as always, the outreach highlights report, also an updated version of our active projects list, and our contract status report is also available in your packet. No legal update today. There is a written report for the legislative update. It's early in the legislative session yet, so most of what you see are spot bills, but if you have any questions there, Ryan Stambra is always available to answer those. And I think with that, I'm ready to talk about our 2020 Delta Stewardship Council annual report. So I'm going to kick this off with a few comments. And then I'm going to invite Jeff Henderson and Louise Conrad to the dais, and then we'll close out with a brief presentation of the report itself by Brittany Young from our communications team.
Madam Chair, this is Member Natoli. If I could just ask Jessica, before she embarks on that, just back on the contract agreements, if I could just for a moment. I in reviewing those, and again, since it's been a while, I did note that like 15 contracts for a variety of projects and work are going to expire April 30th, or they end April 30th. Could I just again have some explanation as to, well, will those all come to conclusion, or are those anticipated dates?
I don't have the report in front of me.
Okay.
And so I don't know if you could name some of the contract names. I would probably.
Okay, in Michigan State University, USGS, UC Los Angeles, Davis, for, levy assessment. There are a number of, obviously ongoing work that started, some of them several years ago, but they all show an April 30th expiration date. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I think some of those were granted a time and contract extension because they are directed actions through our Delta Science program, which is likely why they don't end on June 30th, which is a little more typical. But if there are any particular contracts that you would like me to follow up on in more detail, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, that's fine. Again, they all seem to culminate on a very same date, and I was just curious about that. So, okay, thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Certainly.
Okay, we're ready to talk about the annual report. So most of you have not seen the annual report, although it probably landed in your inbox early this morning. It's hot off the presses, so to speak. I'm very excited to present it to you. It's also accompanied in your packet by a 2020 priorities matrix, which is essentially a mirror document to what you saw in January of last year when we discussed the council's 2-year priority work plan together. So this progress serves as a foundation for the council's 2021 work plan, which will be presented and discussed at next month's meeting. The title of the annual report document is Adaptation in the Face of Uncertainty, which we felt pretty well sums up our overall work here at the council, but seemed especially appropriate given the curveballs thrown by 2020. So the council's focus in 2020 really included the continuation of work on major program commitments, including our Delta Levy investment strategy work, providing statewide guidance on Delta ecosystem recovery through our ecosystem amendment. Lots of work that is ongoing to implement the Delta Science Plan in order to improve understanding of the Delta system and our collective ability to address those challenges. And then, of course, developing the first ever Delta-specific climate change vulnerability assessment, which we have been referring to as Delta Adapts. So while this past year presented some unique challenges, I'm very proud that council staff were able to make progress on each of these major initiatives, as well as many other activities that are detailed in the report that all move us forward in implementing the Delta Plan. During the development of the 2020-21 priorities, council members asked staff to strengthen our agency communications and outreach with a specific focus on how council activities are advancing and informing management decisions. So to that end, council staff in 2020 updated the council's communication strategy, which now acts as an overarching strategic document outlining the goals and methods of our outreach activities. It talks about the efforts necessary to effectively communicate with the various audiences that we engage with through strategic messaging, channels, and materials. And it has a discussion of measuring performance in how we communicate and engaging in meaningful partnerships. And then as a complement, last spring, you all approved the organization's first public participation plan, which really underscores the council's ongoing commitment to public engagement in our work. So to that end, 2020 saw further expansion of our social media outreach, our reach and our outreach, and improved usage of our website. We produced 8 popular blogs last year to better promote the work of the council and to share our views on topics that are critical to our work. And last year, despite the pandemic, we held 39 virtual meetings and events, and we continue to look for new and improved ways to communicate our work and engage new audiences. I can't end without expressing gratitude to our staff for rolling with the punches this year and still continuing on with implementing our organization's mission. We never take them for granted, but I would say that this last year we were all reminded that the IT staff and the administrative staff are absolutely the backbone of this agency. We experienced a near instantaneous transition to 100% telework, which was nothing short of a huge logistical lift. We left the office on short notice on March 13th, 2020, and we all needed to adapt quickly to new online collaboration tools, video conferencing software, and really, I think, pausing and taking time to realize that we all needed to provide each other with extra support as we're all parents or caregivers or just human beings living through a pandemic. It's been a challenging year, but I think our team has grown stronger because of it. And so I'm so impressed that we can continue to meet these major program milestones. So here I've got 2 of my deputies, Dr. Louise Conrad from the science program, I think is going to kick us off, and then hand it over to Jeff Henderson, my deputy for planning and performance. They're going to provide some of their comments and insights on the accomplishments of their respective divisions for 2020. And then we'll close out with Brittany Young talking about the report itself with a few visuals. So thank you. And with that, Louise, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me, Jessica?
Okay.
Excellent. So thank you and good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. As Jessica already noted, the Delta Science Program and the rest of the council really maintained strong engagement and advanced major initiatives in 2020, despite the year's challenges. I'm going to highlight just a few here. However, I would really, again, like to thank the hard work and dedication of the Delta Science Program staff, without whom this work would not have happened. First, as we transitioned to remote work, the Delta Independent Science Board meetings continued without missing a beat, thanks to the rapid transition to a virtual format that was led by the council's IT and communications teams, as well as Edmund Yu and Karen Kafitz, who are key support staff for the Independent Science Board. In the summer, the Independent Science Board saw the transition of 6 board seats to new, highly accomplished and prominent scientists whose appointments were approved by this council. In 2020, we held 5 large public workshops, 2 of which I'm going to highlight here that took place in September. The first was for management of Sacramento spring run Chinook salmon, which is one of the protected species or runs of Chinook salmon in the Central Valley. And this workshop was led by Henry DeBay, Eva Bush, and Pascal Gertler. Nearly 300 people from public and private sectors attended this 3-day workshop, and the discussions held there are now actively informing the departments of water resources and fish and wildlife that for developing population estimates for this imperiled species. The second workshop was led by Rachel Klopfenstein, who you heard earlier is one of the participants in the Water Leaders Program for this coming year. And she led a workshop for collaborative development of the priority management questions to inform the update to the Delta Science Program's Science Action Agenda. With input from nearly 100 people at this workshop and a set of surveys that reached out to a broader group, we have now published a set of the top 65 management questions for the Delta. This was a major distillation as we initially received a total of over 1,200 suggested management questions. These final questions are going to directly inform the science actions that are needed to inform management and will be included in the updated Science Action Agenda. And that will be the topic of another major outreach effort in 2021. In addition to the workshops, I also want to highlight 2 other accomplishments where we have been providing leadership for science-based management of the Delta. In April, we saw the publication of the Social Science Strategy for the Delta. The report was published by the Social Science Task Force, which was an academic panel that we charged with developing a roadmap for better integrating social and natural sciences in the Delta with an overall goal of better understanding the human dimension of the Delta and its management, and then improving our approach to management informed by social science. The report is the culmination of over a year of effort, which included 2 public workshops. And we are already implementing some of the recommendations, notably by increasing our capacity for social science work within the council. To start, we have partnered with California Sea Grant to hire a leader for advancing the social science agenda for the Delta. Dr. Jessica Rudnick is now a new Sea Grant extension specialist who works directly within the council. Dr. Rudnick just started in December, and you will get to meet her today. Finally, we are also actively advancing our mission to fund on-the-ground research in the Delta. With leadership from Dylan Stern within the science program, we have solidified a funding partnership with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and released a solicitation for research proposals in November. With Reclamation, we expect to award $9 million for science in the Delta. As you have heard in previous meetings, we've already seen tremendous interest in this opportunity for funding, receiving 134 letters of intent to submit full proposals, which will be submitted by February 12th. This response demonstrates an interest in participating in Delta science at an international scale. Now, all these highlights don't fully capture the full scope of recent accomplishments of the Delta Science Program. I want to note that staff have also published original science articles in peer-reviewed journals, provided leadership in science synthesis and analyses for climate change, and for evaluation of long-term monitoring surveys in the Delta, in addition to leading other workshops that I didn't mention here on new technologies and approaches for environmental monitoring, for the connectivity of estuarine systems. I really encourage you to read the Council's annual report for more details. And thank you again for a little time here this morning, and I will turn it over to Jeff Henderson to provide the update from the Planning Division. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Louise. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. It's my pleasure to highlight some of the Planning and Performance Division staff's key accomplishments in this past year. And as Jessica noted earlier, our most recent accomplishment is the release of the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment for public review and comment. This interdisciplinary work really represents the first comprehensive climate change study for the Delta region. And we hope that it will provide local governments with a toolkit of data and information to help with regulatory and planning documents. And it represents over 2 years of staff work, including modeling, mapping, and community engagement activities. We're excited to embark on the next phase of this effort and adaptation strategy in 2021. Just want to recognize the accomplishments of Harriet Ross, Andrew Schwartz, Avery Livingood, Dylan Chappell, Annika Keeley, Corey Copeland, Molly Williams, Annie Merritt, and others on the team for that effort. The council staff has also been engaged in a multi-year effort to complete the Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment, which Jessica also mentioned earlier. In May of 2020, staff brought a preliminary draft of that amendment to the council for review and discussion. And that amendment incorporates what's known as ecosystem-based management approaches and was developed with extensive feedback from local, state, and federal agencies, the Delta ISB, peer reviewers, stakeholders, and the public. That effort represents more than 3 years of staff's dedicated work to synthesize best available science and develop policy alternatives and performance measures. We're now working on an environmental impact report for the project and anticipate bringing the amendment to the council for potential approval later in 2021. I want to recognize the efforts of Harriet Ross, Avery Livingood, Kaylee Griffith, Corey Copeland, Dan Constable, and others on the team for that effort. One of the council's other 2020 priorities was to improve our understanding of the state's policy for reduced reliance on Delta water supplies and improved regional self-reliance, and implementation of that policy in water suppliers' urban and agricultural water management plans, as is required by Delta Plan Policy WRP1. The Department of Water Resources has now released draft guidebooks for the preparation of urban and agricultural water management plans that include provisions describing how water suppliers can demonstrate that reduced reliance on Delta water supplies and their improved regional self-reliance. We see this as a major staff achievement for the year, reflecting extensive coordination with DWR regarding preparation of those guidelines, and want to recognize the efforts of Ryan Stanbra, Andrew Schwartz, Anthony Navacero, Dan Constable, and Corey Copeland in that effort. You'll also recall that the council deployed a web-based dashboard in 2019 to visually track Delta Plan performance measures, which we discussed a bit at our December meeting, and provide access to associated data, methods, and information. During 2020, that dashboard had more than 21,000 page views, which was a threefold increase from the previous year. Council staff added additional features to the dashboard in 2020, including a new page that identifies the schedule of performance data updates that was requested by council members in order to improve the predictability and usability of the information on the dashboard. And I'd like to recognize the efforts of Martina Kohler, Chris Kwan, Corey Copeland, Scott Navarro, and our IT team in that effort. And on top of these accomplishments, we received 7 certifications of consistency for covered actions in 2020 and completed a full update to the council's covered actions web portal in April. One appeal was submitted by the Salmon County Water Agency against the Westland Water District's Lower Yolo Ranch Restoration Project, although that appeal was subsequently withdrawn. Additionally, we distributed 20 comment letters to identify potential future covered actions and to ensure state and local agencies are aware of the Delta Plan's requirements and how they might apply to their work. This outreach is part of our ongoing early consultation process, which engages state and local agencies regarding certification of consistency requirements. I'd like to recognize the efforts there of Avery Livingood, Dan Constable, Anthony Navacero, Lita Bridey, and in fact, the entire Planning and Performance Division staff, as well as support from the Delta Science Program. And in the background, staff have been working on updates to the Delta Levy investment strategy in response to council direction in March 2020 to evaluate new information regarding Delta Levy elevations. Staff anticipates bringing that information to the council for discussion in the next few months, and I'd like to recognize specifically the efforts of Andrew Schwartz and Aaron Mullen in that endeavor. And then I would just like to add my personal thanks to Planning Division staff for showing resiliency and determination in a really challenging year. Staff has advanced the council's mission in new and cross-cutting ways, and we're very much looking forward to working with you on the next steps of many of these endeavors in 2021. So I'll now hand it off to Brittany Young to review the annual report for you.
At this point, are there any questions for Jeff or Louise from the council members? If not, let's see if Brittany's there with her slides.
Hey, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brandon, for bringing up the slides here for us. And thank you, Jessica, for having me join your executive officer report to provide a brief overview of the council's 2020 annual report. Thrilled to be here. So first, I'd like to share a little bit about the flow of the document, which you see the cover of right here on the screen. Following an introduction by our executive officer, this year's report highlights the major accomplishments of our agency as they relate to the 3 phases of adaptive management: plan, do, and evaluate and respond. The first section, plan, features insights on key initiatives like Delta Adapts, the Science Action Agenda, and the Science Needs Assessment. The second section, Do, features content on the ecosystem amendment, social science, the forums, workshops, and symposia hosted in 2020, blogs and research publications, and public participation plan. The third section, Evaluate and Respond, features content on the council's authority being upheld in the Delta, overview of performance measures, and the Delta Science Proposal Solicitation. The report concludes with a section dedicated to our people, and it spotlights former councilmember Randy Fiorini, departures from the council and arrivals at the council, and then lists our Superior Accomplishment awardees. Next slide, please, Brandon. Yay, thank you. So now that you know what's in the report, I'm sure you're wondering where can you find it. So the report PDF can be downloaded or viewed online on our deltacouncil.ca.gov. And the URL is right there on the screen for you guys. So far, the link has been distributed via the council's listserv and social media. And additionally, it will be sent out to our partners and external colleagues for inclusion in Delta newsletters and to be distributed broadly amongst their staff, some of whom are mentioned in the annual report. Hard copies of the report are available upon request through Amanda Bowl. And speaking of Amanda, I'd just like to offer huge thanks to both Amanda and Geneva, our Information Officer 1, for their endless contributions to this report. Without them, it certainly would not read or look as beautiful as it does. And lastly, please stay tuned because we have lots of exciting council communication products on the way in 2021 that will be built on the customizable version of this report template as requested in the council's October 2019 retreat. I think that is pretty much it for our slides here. Just like, again, big thank you for your time and happy reading, everyone. I hope you really enjoy diving into our 2020 annual report.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks for walking us through it since we don't have it in our hands to hold it and flip through just yet. That was a very helpful presentation, so thank you.
Happy to be here. Have a great day.
Okay, well, with that, I hope you look for the document, read the document, and give us any feedback you have, and then also help us to use it as a communications tool for all the work that's going on here at the council. And with that, unless there are any questions, it concludes my executive officer's report. Thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Are there any questions for Jessica, council members?
I had one, Jessica, if you could just, you and I have talked about this, but could you just maybe generalize the progress we've made in terms of public outreach, and to what extent is it true that one silver lining of the COVID era is that more online participation has broadened our reach? Just any general observations on that?
Yeah, and I might invite Brittany and even Brandon to weigh in on that since they track those metrics closely. But I would say that anecdotally, what I've been hearing is that generally our public participation in our meetings has remained the same or increased. We have not seen a drop off. So Brittany, I don't know if you have something you want to add to that.
Nope, you're spot on, but I am happy to pull those pull the analytics from our reports and email them out.
Yeah, Brittany was helpful in sending me some data points before this meeting. I think our website traffic, as one example, during the last year almost doubled, or maybe it was the time spent on the page almost doubled. We've added quite a few new social media followers, and we're seeing that people really like the ability to phone in to the various science program conferences and workshops that we have. We get widespread participation now from across the state, which was a little more difficult pre-pandemic. So definitely thinking through post-pandemic how we can maintain some of those strategies so that we can continue to serve the entire state, as that's the design of this agency. So thanks for asking the question. I think we're feeling good about it and we're learning something new every day.
Thank you. And thank you, Brittany.
And
Absolutely.
Jessica, really quick, if I could just add, I would say that the attendance at our symposiums and workshops have been larger than they usually would be in person. And I think a good example is probably this at the council meetings, for example. Like right now we have 48 people in this Zoom room, which is probably more than we usually do when we were in person.
Thank you.
We also track analytics because we have, we post all of our recorded meetings and we get quite a few people viewing the meeting after the fact as well. So yeah, I think that's been the silver lining for sure of this work from home era, is just pushing us to test these new approaches and new technologies and figuring out how they can really result in more meaningful ways for the council to engage the public. So thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you. And I just want to say, as chair, I actually get to spend a fair amount of time with the executive staff and some of the other staff on certain projects. And I have to remark that we have a really inspiring, amazing team. Despite everything, all the upheaval that 2020 brought, our crew continued to be productive and creative. And it's really refreshing to see a team that is in sync and supportive of each other, and mindful of the end game, fire in the belly. And it is so inspiring for me to work with all of you. So thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is no public comment.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to agenda item 6, lead scientist report with Dr. Laurel Larson.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, council members. Welcome to Councilmember Natoli. I look forward to meeting you and working with you. And I'll just piggyback on what Susan was saying. It is a tremendous privilege and honor for me to be able to represent the work of the staff within the Delta Science program to all of you. They are a tremendously inspiring, smart, productive, and creative group. So I'm going to use my time today to build a little bit on what Louise Conrad reported on in her annual report. I will start out by spotlighting a recent publication that was in part funded by the Delta Stewardship Council through the Delta Science Fellowship Program. Then I'm going to introduce Just Redneck to you all, our recent hire who Louise talked about as an outcome of the Social Science Task Force report. And then I'll provide some updates of ongoing activities in the Delta Science program. So may I have the slide, please, for the article spotlight? I'm going to start out by reporting on an article that recently came out in Science magazine, arguably one of the top 2 scientific peer-reviewed publications in the world with international readership. This article is titled "A Complex Phenotype in Salmon Controlled by a Simple Change in Migratory Timing," and it was led by Neil Thompson et al., which is a team from UC Santa Cruz and NOAA. Funding for the main author was in part from California Sea Grant and the Delta Science Fellowship Program. So you might be wondering about this word phenotype in the title. Phenotype is a word that is used to describe an outward appearance or a set of behaviors in an individual, which might be distinct from that individual's genetic makeup. For example, in humans, the brown-eyed phenotype, which I exhibit, might result from having just 1 or 2 inherited genes for brown eyes from your parents. Often it is inferred that phenotypes that are very different from one another are indicative of significant differences in the underlying genotype or genetic makeup, perhaps different enough that the organisms likely do not breed with each other and hence may be managed as different species. Such is the case for Chinook salmon, for which the different phenotypes are referred to as ecotypes. Chinook salmon ecotypes are differentiated by their migration timing, spring run or fall run, and a host of other differences in appearance, including fat content. Spring run salmon are much more rare and are protected under the Endangered Species Act, whereas fall run salmon are not. This study questioned the basis of the assumption that spring run and fall run salmon do have genotypes that are different enough to justify managing them as separate species. So to do this, they sequenced the genomes of 160 fish collected from the Klamath and Sacramento River basins. Now, what they found is that the genetic differences between these salmon ecotypes were restricted to a very small region on the genome, which they called the ROSA, which stands for Region of Strong Association. There, a gene for migration timing is encoded with a simple pattern of inheritance that is analogous to that of eye color. So essentially, the whole suite of phenotypic differences, including the difference in appearance and fat content, are controlled by this one gene for migratory timing. The authors inferred that the differences in appearance aren't hardwired at all, but rather arise as a result of the different environmental conditions, including the food sources that are available to the fish at the timing of their migration. Now, the authors also found evidence that spring and fall run Chinook salmon do interbreed in the wild, which further supports the assumption that they aren't different species at all. When they do interbreed, their offspring tend to have intermediate migration timing. So these findings are important for several reasons. One is that they present a rosy picture for restoration and management. In places like the Klamath in Northern California, where spring run Chinook have almost been completely extirpated in parts of the watershed, loss of that spring run population does not imply loss of all of the other genetic adaptations to the watershed that had evolved over long periods of time. Those adaptations are found on genes other than those in the ROSA and are held in common with the extant fall run population. Thus, when ancestral parts of the watershed are reopened to the salmon upon removal of the dams, it's possible that a robust spring run population could reemerge, particularly with managed breeding with the few existing spring run populations within the watershed. Further to the south, though, in the Sacramento drainage, these findings do challenge the way in which we manage spring and fall run populations separately. And the big question is here, do we really need a separate San Joaquin restoration program focused on spring run salmon if we know that the spring run and the fall run are hybridizing? As you might imagine, this paper has been received with great interest by the Delta scientific community, but its interpretations are not without controversy, and this paper is likely one that will undergo continued heated discussion both within and outside of the scientific literature. So I wanted to bring that to your attention as something to continue to pay attention to. And before I introduce Jess Redneck, I want to pause here and ask if there are any questions on this paper.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thanks, Laurel. I just was curious and certainly had a chance to read through the report that was attached, and appreciate your taking the time to explain it. And it just piqued my interest when you said that, you know, obviously the restoration work and the removal of dams on the Klamath, but that presumes that you still have remaining spring run Chinooks. If they went extinct, is the premise that because of some of these inherited, habits, I guess, or traits in different times of the year and such, that there could be some restoration, even if the spring run Chinook were to go extinct, or did it go that far in its review?
So my understanding is, yes, there is still some hope for restoration, mainly because of hatchery operations that maintain spring run salmon populations. Now, if you're only working with hatchery populations, there's a danger of interbreeding and a host of genetic problems that come with interbreeding. But my understanding is that because these spring run salmon do hybridize with the fall run salmon, you could selectively breed with the wild pool and avoid some of those problems that come with inbreeding. So eventually you could select for individuals that exhibit that the spring run timing, but do have the genetic diversity of the wild salmon pool.
Okay, so some of those behaviors, again, as you said, selectively, you could look to potentially restore, more robust run different times of the year.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Earl.
I have a question. The importance of knowing the types, I was unclear. That is this to help them survive, or, I mean, we're trying to understand these differences, let's say, in the salmon, in how and why it's created, what causes all of it, and you explained that. So, and then we figure out why they are different, right? And the outcome of the study will be that we do certain things in preservation of them.
Yes, that is the hope. So the outcome helps us better understand how to manage for a diversity of migration timings, which is important because of the many ecological values, the distinct ecological values that are provided by maintaining populations with this diversity and migration timing. And then there are also cultural benefits and native practices that rely on healthy populations of all of these subspecies, or all of these ecotypes, I should say.
So my second question then is, how do we intercept? I mean, what would be some of the measures that you would recommend that this finding will lead us to do?
So one of the big recommendations is that we need to make the habitat available to each of these ecotypes of salmon. So we need to ensure that our flows and the characteristics conveyed by those flows, including temperature, are coincide appropriately with the timing of these runs. And then I think this also argues for the importance of continued hatchery operations and the urgency of managing these different ecotypes with the help of hatchery operations before some of these subspecies or some of these ecotypes are completely extirpated in the wild.
Thank you. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you for your question.
Excuse me, Laurel, is anyone else hearing in the background some sort of report on nature-based adaptation, or there's background noise I'm hearing? Or is it just my connection?
No,
I was hearing it, but I'm not right now.
Okay.
That was coming from someone's open microphone.
Okay.
Sure. I'd like to remind everybody to mute their microphones when they are not talking.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Sorry for the interruption, Laurel.
No problem. I think I'll proceed now with the next part of my report. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jess Rudnick. And it's a pleasure to introduce you to Jessica Rudnick. As I mentioned before, as an outcome of the Social Science Task Force report, Jess Rudnick was hired to work with the council as a California Sea Grant Extension Specialist. She came on board in December and has really hit the ground running. Jessica holds a PhD from the University of California, Davis, where she was affiliated with the Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior. Her PhD focused on the human dimension of agricultural environmental issues, and she is passionate about scientific communication, scientist engagement with public policy, and expanding equitable access and opportunity to science education. So without further ado, I turn the microphone over to Dr. Rudnick.
Thank you, Dr. Larson. Is everybody able to hear me okay? Great. Well, good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. I really appreciate the chance to be here and get to introduce myself today. As Dr. Larson mentioned, I am the new California Sea Grant Social Science Extension Specialist, charged with leading the effort to integrate social science in the Delta, which is an exciting and large task. And I just started in early December, so I'm in an intense and exciting learning phase and looking forward to getting to know you all and work with you all better going forward. My introduction today will just highlight a bit about my background in interdisciplinary environmental social science. I'll cover how I see the importance of integrating social science into the Delta and some of the objectives for my position. And then I'll give you a high-level overview of the framework and vision that I'm starting to develop for how to carry out this work. So my training is in interdisciplinary environmental social sciences, focused on understanding human behavior and environmental governance. And as Dr. Larson mentioned, I recently finished my PhD at UC Davis in the Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior. And my research background pulls from multiple different social science disciplines, including sociology, psychology, and political science. And these different disciplines give us both theory and tools for how to think about human decision-making and behavior around complex environmental issues. My previous research focused on understanding farmer decision-making and behavior, specifically around nitrogen fertilizer management, which is a critical challenge for both ecosystem and drinking water protection in California. And I had the chance to work both in the legal Delta as a Delta Science Fellow, as well as in the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valleys. This work was extensively collaborative, working with the state and regional water boards, with local water quality coalitions and farm bureaus, and with different non-governmental organizations, including environmental and environmental justice groups. I wanted to highlight a few of our exciting findings, just to give you a sense of how this type of work eventually translates into policy and management outcomes. We identified that private on-farm consultants are the most trusted source of information that farmers go to in deciding how to manage their nitrogen. This is important because that has allowed us to then work with the organization that trains and certifies these consultants to ensure that the consultants are informed on how to give the best farm practice recommendations that are protective of ecosystem and water protection goals. Our work also was used to inform the development of some climate smart agriculture incentive programs that are being administered through the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And this was intended to help our spending of cap and trade monies be directed as efficiently and equitably as possible to the agricultural community in their adaptation to a more climate resilient farming industry. And I share these details to give you all a sense of the collaborative and participatory approach that I bring into this work. And as I said, to give you some tangible examples of how behavioral science can be put to use to develop and inform future management and policy actions. So turning to social science in the Delta, I think we would all agree that humans are a central part of this complex system. And that we tend to know more about fish population dynamics or invasive species impacts or flood control models than we do about the human communities living in and near the system and how they think, feel, and behave. For example, we have relatively crude understandings of how in-Delta residents perceive different environmental issues. We don't understand well how Delta managers access and use scientific information or how they process and grapple with uncertainty. And we have relatively little understanding at sort of a complex governance level of where there are incentives or barriers to increasing cooperation and collaboration across the many different public, private, and civil sector actors that are governing and managing the resources in the region. And overlooking these human components or not having a great understanding of how these very diverse groups of people think, feel, and behave can lead to unintended consequences in our management and policy solutions. And these are the types of questions and issues that we hope social science can lend the tools to help develop more efficient, more effective, and more equitable policy and management going forward. As you heard from Dr. Conrad earlier in her highlights from the annual report, the Delta Science Program and Delta Stewardship Council staff have been working to identify where this gap of social science knowledge comes from, and have worked over the past couple of years to develop a strategy for developing enhanced social science capacity in our community and throughout the council's work. This included, as Dr. Conrad mentioned, the convening of a social science task force in 2018. And that task force developed a final report, which was released in early 2020, including some high-level recommendations for how to go about integrating social sciences into the Delta science policy and management landscape. And I'm thrilled that hiring for my position was one of the council's early actions in response to that task force report. And so the goal of my position being here is to start to figure out how to operationalize the other goals that were laid out in that task force report, as well as the priorities that the council has. So my vision for this work really builds off of that foundation from the task force, as well as the other efforts that council staff have already put in to develop specific recommendations and objectives for the upcoming years. I am planning to organize my time and efforts here around 3 large goals. The first being integrating more social science theory and methods, tools into ongoing council work. So for example, I've started to work with the team developing the science action agenda to think about how social science questions can contribute to that effort. I've also started to work with the Delta Adapts team to brainstorm on how we integrate more human dimensions and issues of Delta as place into the adaptation phase of that ongoing climate change project. The second large area that I'll spend my time is focusing on sustained outreach and engagement with communities in the Delta, as well as with the social science community in the region. I am looking forward to helping support the development of more equitable public participation best practices, to developing long-lasting relationships with the environmental justice communities and community-based organizations working in this area, and to initiating a collaborative community of social science, academic scientists, and practitioners across the region who can contribute to building large-scale longitudinal studies where we begin to understand how the population in and around the Delta is changing over time. So I'm excited to say we're planning a kickoff event for this social science network that will take place at the Bay Delta Science Conference in April, and encourage anyone who's interested to attend that. And then the final area that I'll be spending my time is around initiating some long-term collaborative applied social science research studies. And the first project in this vein that I'm excited to get underway is a study on how Delta communities perceive climate change risks that will affect them, how this perception of risk aligns with the risks that have been identified through the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment study, and where there is willingness or capacity to engage with different adaptation strategies. So I'm hopeful that this understanding of the human dimension around climate change will really help us bridge the gap between the biophysical science and actually implementing adaptation actions going forward. So I want to close to say that I'm here to be a resource on the human dimension issues in the region. And I'm hoping that we'll develop useful and relevant understandings of the key stakeholders that are influencing and influenced by the decision-making in the Delta. My philosophy to doing this work is to be as collaborative and engaged as possible. And I'm hopeful that these efforts can be multi-purpose and leveraged to inform multiple projects both within the council and happening externally across the rest of the region. So I look forward to getting to know you all and work with you all further. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments now or as follow-up. Thank you.
Council members, any questions for Dr. Rudnick? Well, Jess, thank you and welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Oh, hi, Judge.
this is a welcome addition to this. I mean, it's really critical, and I really welcome Ms. Rednick, Dr. Rednick, to our council.
Thank you, Councilmember Demrell.
And we look forward to your efforts and the results. That's an ambitious agenda you've laid out. It's exciting. Thank you, Dr. Rednick.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan.
Well, I will pick up from there. Thank you very much, Dr. Rednick. And I'll just say that I think I express the opinion of many when I say that we wish we could clone her. We're very excited about her ideas. So I'm going to be brief in the remainder of my time, and I'll provide a quick update on ongoing activities within the Delta Science program and a few things to keep on your radar. On your printout, which was prepared by Byron Riggins, you'll see another update on the PSN. I won't elaborate too much further over what Dr. Conrad updated you with earlier, other than to say that our letters of intent solicitation was very successful. We received requests for about double the amount of funding that we have awarded in previous years. So this is a huge credit to the council, from the science program to the legal team to communications. And this enables us to fund new work that will address key uncertainties in implementing the Delta Plan. I think the popularity of this solicitation represents the growing visibility and competitiveness of our science funding program on both a national and international stage. The full proposals are due on February 12th, so stay tuned on what we end up funding. A few things on your radar. First of all, the Adaptive Management Forum. Today is an important day for that. Today is the deadline for registering for the Adaptive Management Forum. So make sure you sign up if that is your intent. When the Independent Science Board conducted their review on adaptive management in 2016, one of their key recommendations was that a regular forum that brings together scientists and adaptive management practitioners from multiple agencies and institutions be held. And the Biennial Adaptive Management Forum is in direct response to that recommendation. The 2021 forum will be held virtually on February 3rd through 5th. The agenda is online now and linked from the council's website, so you could take a look at that. Some of the themes include revisiting the foundations and planning for the future of adaptive management, the practice of adaptive management planning, closing the adaptive management loop, adaptive management surprises and successes, mechanisms of adaptive management, and the future of adaptive management. So we're looking forward to a set of engaging and inspiring discussions. Another thing to keep on your radar is the Steelhead Trout workshop, which will be held over 3 half days from February 16th through 18th. This workshop represents a collaborative effort between the Council, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Metropolitan Water District, California Department of Water Resources, CDFW, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. The impetus was the biological opinion on the long-term operation of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project. And this highlights that the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation coordinate with the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program in order to sponsor a workshop for developing a plan to monitor steelhead populations within the San Joaquin Basin and or the San Joaquin River downstream of the confluence of the Stanislaus River. So this includes steelhead and rainbow trout on non-project San Joaquin tributaries. To register for the meeting and view the agenda, visit the events tab on the Delta Stewardship Council webpage. And then the final thing on your radar that I'd like to highlight is the 11th Biennial Bay Delta Science Conference. And just as a reminder, this is a conference that's jointly sponsored by the Council and the U.S. Geological Survey, and it's going to be held virtually between April 6th and 9th of 2021. Abstract submission closed on December 28th, and we received over 300 abstracts, which is more than twice the amount of speaking slots we have allocated. So this response, together with the PSN, illustrates the growing visibility of our Delta Science program and its growing competitiveness. In the case of this conference, this might also reflect a positive outcome of the virtual format. So this is an additional response to the question that council members Ngali formerly asked. The conference website is now live and it's linked on the council's webpage, so be sure to visit that as well. And then finally, I'm going to report on some of the numbers. It's a little bit, this is somewhat interesting this month, given that we just had a major rainstorm. And one thing to be aware of is that the numbers on your report were current as of the 25th, so they did not reflect this big atmospheric river that's going through right now. I refreshed the numbers again yesterday, and I'll report on the refreshed numbers. So currently in the northern Sierra, precipitation amounts are about 40% of the average value for this state. So despite the fact that this is a very large atmospheric river system, we're still at a small fraction of what we've usually received to date. In the Central Sierra, that percentage is 32% of the average amount of precipitation received to date. In terms of snowpack, Northern Sierra snowpack is at 51%, Central Sierra at 48%, and Southern Sierra only at 28% right now. So we are continuing to look at drought conditions, or it's looking likely that we will develop drought conditions in this water year. In terms of reservoir storage, Shasta is at 69%, Oroville at 54%, and San Luis Reservoir at 65%. Sacramento and San Joaquin River flows are also very low right now at 25% and 20% respectively. And total Delta exports are currently at 42% of average for this time of year. So that concludes my part of this report, and I would welcome any additional questions from the council or the public.
Council members, do you have any questions for Dr. Larson? Okay, hearing none. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is no public comment.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Well, thank you, Dr. Larson. We'll move on to agenda item 7, Delta Conveyance update. So since I am recused from the council's regulatory and potential adjudicative roles with regard to the Delta Conveyance project, I will be leaving the meeting and handing over meeting management to Councilmember Judge Damrell. So thank you all for your being with us, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. And take it away, Judge.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Tatayan. As to agenda item 7, Delta Conveyance update, I would like Jessica to kick this off, but before I do, I just want to welcome Don Natoli as well. He was a terrific member of the Delta Protection Commission and representation on the board, so I certainly welcome him and his comments. Jessica?
Okay, thank you, Judge. As you may remember, the Department of Water Resources released a notice of preparation for an environmental impact report for a new Delta Conveyance project a year ago this month. In addition, on behalf of DWR, the Delta Conveyance Design Construction Authority, DCDCA, has been facilitating a stakeholder engagement committee to advise the DCDCA on siting considerations related to the design of several features of the proposed conveyance project. So this effort aims to identify ways to reduce or minimize the potential impacts of facility siting on surrounding uses and Delta communities. These are important considerations before the council within a future certification of consistency for the project, especially with regard to Delta Plan Policy DPP2, which is respect local land use when siting water or flood facilities or restoring habitats. So today I'd like to welcome staff from the Department of Water Resources and the DCA. They are here to provide an update on continued efforts since they last spoke with us in August. So I'd like to welcome Carrie Buckman, who is the Environmental Program Manager for Delta Conveyance at the department, and Catherine Mallon, the Executive Director of the Joint Powers Authority, the DC-DCA. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our guests.
You want me to start, Carrie? Great. If you could pull up the presentation. All right, terrific. There we go, thanks. All right, next slide. So first, I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to update you all on our progress at the DCA and also with our stakeholder engagement committee. I just have 4 topics to cover today. Hopefully won't take any more than 10 minutes of your time. We'll do a quick status update on where we are with our deliverables to Carrie's team, give you a summary of the agenda topics that we've covered in the last quarter since we last met, an update on the Bethany Alternative, which has been the focus of our work mostly over the last 6 months, and then a little bit on the future of the SCC. Next. So this chart here shows the status of the DCA in completing our project engineering reports for the alternatives that have been identified by DWR. The upper bars are the East and Central Corridor, and then the lower bars are the Bethany Corridor. We deliver in 2 phases, environmental data documents that allow Carrie to start her analysis, and then we follow up with the project engineering report, which is the long-winded narrative that describes the project. We've completed the East and Central Corridors environmental data back in August of last year, and we just recently submitted our final draft project engineering report. For Bethany, we just completed the environmental data earlier this month, and we're on target for delivering the project engineering report, the full narrative report for Bethany in mid-April. Next slide. So as for the SCC topics over the past few months, the meetings have largely focused on reviewing the various components of the Bethany Alternative with the committee and seeking feedback. We also spent a large chunk of the December meeting going back over all of the deferred topics and went through each one of these topics in detail so that we could clear out the question and answer database. And I'll speak a little more to that on the next slide. In addition, DWR has used these meetings as a forum to keep the committee members updated on critical work that their team is focused on, including the status of CEQA, Community Benefits Program, the recently completed EJ survey, and to also provide the group with more background on tribal engagement requirements and what's happening there. And each of these topics are largely brought forth by requests from the committee members. So we try to be responsive within the boundaries of our purview at the DCA. Before I move on, I just wanted to also note that we added 2 new members to the SCC late last year. One was a member specifically from the town of Hood. As you know, that's an area that there's some specific impacts in close proximity. So we wanted to have a specific representative from the town. And we were also able to add an ex officio member to represent emergency response in the Delta, who helps address questions from the committee on those types of issues. Next slide. So as we talked earlier in a prior meeting, we record every question that's asked by the committee members, and we provide answers to each of those as the best of our ability. We track these in a database, and we distribute updates at each meeting in their member packets. And the full suite of all of the Q&As are available upon request from any member, either of the committee or the public. But in December, what we did is we pulled out all the topics that had come up over the past year where we had said, let's address that in a future meeting. And so this was the list. I don't need to read it to you, but just wanted to point out that we've tried to be as comprehensive as possible in ensuring that the group is educated on the full scope of our engineering work. So again, this was a big part of the December meeting, was going through questions that they had that we had deferred. Next slide. So now I want to transition over to the Bethany Alternative, which has been the major focus of the SEC meetings the past 3 months. This Bethany Alternative parallels the east alignment option. It diverges from the east alignment around the lower Roberts Island launch shaft site. And the alignment stays on the east side of the Clifton Court forebay and terminates at a pumping plant that is located adjacent to the existing federal pumping plant, just south of Byron Highway and west of the Mountain House development. There are 2 new shaft locations on this route. One is on Upper Jones Tract and the other on Union Island. And then from the pumping plant, there are 4 parallel pipelines that route up the hillside of the Bethany Reservoir where the flow was discharged. Next slide. Some of the major differences with this alignment compared to the east and central alignment, which was the focus of the SEC meetings, largely from January all the way through around the September timeframe, is that we've eliminated most of the southern complex facilities that were included in that alternative, mostly the large southern forebay and the hydraulic connecting structures that are embedded into the existing California aqueduct. With the Bethany Alternative, there's no intermediate storage needed, as this alternative pumps directly up into the Bethany Reservoir and bypasses the existing Banks pumping plant. Because the forebay isn't included in this alternative, there's very little opportunity for reuse of the tunneling material within this project alternative, as there was in the east and central, where a lot of the tunnel material was used to build up the southern forebay embankments. Next slide. Slow. There we go. So this is a render of the pumping plant and surge basin that would be located adjacent to the existing federal pumping facilities. The site's about 170 acres. We try to do renders of all these facilities at these SEC meetings so people have a very clear idea of the facilities that we're talking about. We've had 2 meetings with the leadership of Mountain House to introduce the Bethany Alternative to them and focus specifically on the facilities that are in closer proximity to their community, and then solicit any feedback they have on it. So those meetings have gone well, and we've had some nice substantive comments, particularly around traffic and logistics plans. Next slide. This slide shows the planned route of the pipelines that extend from the pumping plant to the Bethany Reservoir. Most of the route will be constructed with cut and cover, where we'll dig a trench and bury the pipes, but there's 2 sections where we're going to need to tunnel. One is under the existing federal aqueduct. That's the first tunnel call out that you see there. And then the second one, we need to tunnel under the existing conservation easements that are on the south side of Bethany Reservoir. And those are denoted with the pinkish boxes there on the south side of Bethany Reservoir. So again, to avoid any conflict with those, we're tunneling well underneath them. Next slide. And this final slide here is just a drawing and render of the discharge structure that would be located along the edge of the Bethany Reservoir that would take the tunnel flows and discharge it into the reservoir. Next slide. One of the major topics we covered with the group was around the management of the tunnel spoils. Obviously, the tunneling operations will produce a significant amount of material that will require management. This material is generated at the tunnel launch shaft site. So for the Bethany Alternative, those sites are the Twin Cities site that you see in the north on this graph, and then Lower Roberts site. Those are the two launch shaft sites on the Bethany Alternative. And combined, there's about 14 million cubic yards that must be managed. We looked at two different options for how to deal with this material. One is stockpiling and spreading on site, or transporting off site for some type of beneficial reuse. Next slide. And we presented an alternative analysis of those two options, and the best option that based on the analysis and what was recommended and commented on at the meeting was the stockpiling on site at the launch shaft sites. And really the key driver in that analysis and in the discussion was the significant number of truck trips that would be required to haul this material, which would just add traffic, air quality, and GHG issues to the mix. So there was general consensus that that seemed like the appropriate response on the RTM. Next slide. And this is the last slide on the Bethany. One thing that we look at closely in our analysis is the traffic impacts. And with the Bethany Alternative, the impacts were far less than what we saw with the Eastern and Central Alternative. And that's primarily because we'll rely far less on Byron Highway with this alternative. In our analysis, we identified only two areas that required mediation in order to meet our traffic congestion goals. The first was on State Route 4 that would be used to access a lot of the shaft sites. And in that case, putting a park and ride lot in Stockton for the workers that would be going to those sites remedied the issue. And then along the Byron Highway, there's some traffic that will go along that highway. Most of it will be able to come from the south along various routes to access the site, but there will be some traffic that will come from Byron, and we were able to eliminate those effects by extending the widening work along Byron Highway that is currently proposed, and extending that widening a little bit further towards our exit point to the construction site. So those were the only two remedial traffic issues that we identified in the analysis. Next slide. So just to wrap up, when we look at the SEC in 2021, we're going to wrap up the Bethany Alternative at this upcoming meeting. We intended to do it at yesterday's meeting, but it was canceled due to power outages in the Delta. So we postponed that meeting. So in the next week or two, we're hoping to have a rescheduled meeting and try to wrap up Bethany Alternative. We've done all the presentations of the different alternative analyses, and it just want to some final comments on that. We also, our work is wrapping up, as I showed you earlier. So I think the SEC meetings will be far less frequent, but when we do meet, one of the things we also want to talk about is any design changes that we've made to any of the alternatives as a result of comments from DWR in their analysis. We think that'll be about quarterly, a quarterly need to kind of refresh the communications with the SEC on those design changes. And we'll also continue to have miscellaneous requested topics from the board. Some upcoming topics are around how the project financing works. HABs is an important issue for them, and we'll continue to discuss the community benefits with the group. And then in the future, I think a lot more of obviously the communications around the program will transition to DWR's communication plan on their environmental planning work. Next slide. And that was it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions either now or after Carrie's presentation, whichever you prefer.
Judge Damrell, I have a couple questions for Catherine.
Sure.
Good. Hi, Catherine. Good morning. I wanted to go back to a couple of your slides on the Bethany alternative discussion, particularly as it relates to the tunnel muck and the 14 million plus cubic yards that proposed to be stored on site. I noted, it was in your notes there, that it would require additional 580 acres for, I guess, long-term storage. And I'm curious, again, I have not obviously attended the SEC meetings and have followed from a distance, but what is, from the standpoint of the environmental analysis, you talk about the truck traffic. At some point, though, if it's left there, it's going to be, and I know there was some reference to, electric vehicle development and so forth at some future date, but that says, at least in part, that it is planned long-term storage. And where is the 580 acres? I had a chance to look at the July 2020 documents, which you showed that, and I'm speaking specifically here to the Twin Cities site, but obviously you have the other site, Lower Roberts Island, as a part of this discussion. So I guess a couple of questions that come out of what I just said. One, what's the anticipated duration for storage of material? Where is the 580 additional acres for the storage? And at some point in time, if it's not intended that you're going to have a mountain of muck remain out there, what is the time frame for removal of that material under the considerations for the environmental document?
I'll let Carrie address that part of your question, but just the first part, the sites, the area that we're talking about for the stockpiling this, we would need that area anyway for drying it during construction. So the area that we would be purchasing for these launch shaft sites, the stockpiling would fit within that. So it's not additional land. It's just that that's land that we wouldn't be able to reduce the size of the site post-construction, because we would be using that construction area for the stockpiling. So there's no new land that we're purchasing as a result of stockpiling it on site. It takes a lot of land to air dry this material as you stockpile it. We did do a lot of renders of the stockpiles from different vantage points at both locations at different heights, and went through all of that with the group, and that's all in the presentations.
Would it be possible for council members, and certainly I think for our commission as well, to have that material available?
Absolutely.
Okay, that would have the calculations of the height and what the elevations would be as in slopes and so forth.
Yeah, the RTM presentation that we did, I think it was at the October-November meeting, is really, it's self-explanatory and exhaustive in terms of the renders and the heights and the acreage of these piles. And like I said, it takes vantage viewpoints from different locations and with different heights. So yeah, we'll make that all available to you.
Okay. And then
we try to be as transparent as possible of what this visually would look like under this alternative, to make sure that the SEC clearly understood what we were talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty flat ground out there, Twin Cities. I know
it
that.
Is.
So then the other part you said, Carrie might touch on, because again, if it's anticipated and whether it would be used, I mean, there's this reference that reclamation districts could use it sometime in the future or for other beneficial uses, whatever those might be characterized at, but they're still the material would ultimately have to be moved off. So there's still going to be truck traffic. It may not be during the time of proposed construction or construction activities, but it would be, I guess, over time. And then who would pay for that? So I guess I'm curious about the ultimate removal of material.
Sure, I can help with that. Thank you for asking about it. Hi, thanks for having me. So what we're looking at is that we do hope that over time, people will take advantage of that material and use that for other projects. But we think that we can't necessarily assume that they will. And so what we're doing is we are analyzing it as if it stays on site, talking sort of more briefly about the potential to move it off site and the types of effects of that. But those effects would have to be analyzed more in detail when and if that occurs.
So just follow on real quickly then, Carrie. So what you're saying is that this would encompass coverage for stockpiling, drying and removing and stockpiling, but that any subsequent reuse of it would require additional environmental documentation at somebody else's expense?
Well, it depends. A lot of that depends on what type of effort it is, but we wouldn't be analyzing in detail the truck traffic and the detailed impacts of moving it off-site because we don't know who might use it, where it's going, and we would be making assumptions about others' preferences that we don't think we can make at this time. So we'll be there to help make that work in the future, but at this point, we're looking at stockpiling it on site.
So one final question then. So who retains ownership over the material and responsibility for, assuming it stays there for a long, long time? Who is responsible for that? Is the authority, is the DWR, who in both the locations?
I'd have to follow up on that. You know, we haven't really, we're still in the early planning phases, so I don't have a clear answer to that one.
Okay, I'll be interested as you get some more focus on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Kevin.
Other questions from members? All right, let's move on to the next presentation.
Okay. I think if we can move to the next slide, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, council members, for having me today. I'm really happy to come and give an update. And I'm going to talk today about just a general update about where we are on the project, and then specifically talk more about our efforts to develop a community benefits program. So if we can move on to the next slide. This slide shows our overall environmental review process, and I show it a lot when we do presentations. So the first line is the initial outreach, which reflects the notice of preparation, which we did publish about a year ago. We then held scoping meetings in February and March and issued a scoping summary report in June. We've also identified a plan to reach out to other agencies that are involved in this planning process. So at this point, we've generally moved to the second line of this chart, where we are formulating alternatives, further defining those alternatives, and starting technical reports that help us understand the technical potential effects of these alternatives. And the last box on that line, I think we had an error as we were PDFing it that should say identification of impacts and mitigation. So we haven't started this yet, but we will be using the technical reports as the basis to analyze impacts and identify mitigation for any potential significant impacts. That material will then feed into line 3, which is the draft environmental impact. We'll start with an internal admin draft and then publish a public draft in early 2022. We will circulate that for public review and hold meetings to help people understand the document and take comments. Then the last line on this, we will be working to finish the environmental impact report by responding to comments, making any changes to address those comments, and publishing a final EIR and notice of determination. So next slide, please. So a couple of specific updates about where we are. So for the CEQA side, which is developing the EIR, we're working now on the impact analysis methodology. So for each of the resources, figuring out how we're going to assess impacts and starting the technical studies to help support that analysis. For the NEPA side, the United States Army Corps of Engineers is the NEPA lead, and they're working to develop an EIS, an environmental impact statement. For soil investigations, we did start some field work under the initial study and mitigated negative declaration that we completed last year. That season, though, for the field work has ended, so we have a break during the wet season, and we're scheduled to start investigations again in mid-March. And we are also going to start some outreach to try to obtain temporary entry permissions in February. And finally, I think we mentioned this at a previous effort, but we completed an environmental justice community survey. We closed that survey in December. We are working on compiling results, and by we, I mean my team. I must admit I haven't seen them yet, but I'm really eager to look at them. Just a little information about how many people we had reply. We had 2,156 respondents, and out of that, 920 are identified as a disadvantaged community or severely disadvantaged community. And out of that 920, 675 were within the Delta region. So we're really looking forward to seeing those results soon. So next slide, please. So today I really wanted to focus on talking about the community benefits program and the work that we're engaging in with the communities to start putting this together. A community benefits program is a defined set of commitments made by project proponents and created in coordination with the local community. And I really wanted to highlight this as something that's a central theme to us and really incredibly important. This is something that we cannot develop without coordination with the community. We can't decide what types of benefits are appropriate or needed or desired by the communities. We really want to make sure that we do this in close cooperation, working with the communities. Second, this is also really important to us that these commitments are made separate from and in addition to the permit conditions or environmental mitigation. So as part of developing our environmental permitting documents, we will have mitigation measures that we identify to reduce or avoid environmental impacts. Those are required, and that's not part of the community benefits program. Those requirements we will be implementing, but this program is in addition to those requirements. The community benefits program can include a wide range of benefits to address effects beyond what may be afforded by the existing regulatory processes. And the idea is it's a demonstration of goodwill and concern regarding the adverse effects communities may endure through construction of major capital works. Next slide, please. So this talks about why we want to pursue this program. So we understand that large infrastructure projects like the Delta Conveyance project have some effects that are not necessarily captured within the different permitting efforts. And we want to try to create a way that we can identify those types of effects and potentially provide benefits to help offset some of those effects. So the Community Benefits Program provides opportunities for communities to articulate the ways that we can address those types of conflicts and things that might affect the unique cultural, recreational, natural resource, economic, and agricultural values of the Delta. Next slide, please. So we are going to be working with the community to develop the objectives, but we have a few things here that we think are potential objectives. So we think it can provide a mechanism for the Delta community to identify opportunities for local benefits, provide a mechanism for the project proponents to demonstrate good faith, transparency, and accountability to the community through commitments developed with stakeholder input, and support project consistency with the Delta Plan Policy DPP2, and ultimately the state's co-equal goals for the Delta. Next slide, please. So at this point, we've identified a couple of conceptual categories of benefits. The first is the Delta as Place Fund. And this is, we're putting together a framework through grassroots communication to develop and manage a fund to help empower the local community. And the fund would focus on those projects that can help protect, enhance, and sustain the unique cultural, historical, recreational, agricultural, and economic values of the Delta. Additionally, we're looking at benefits that we're calling project implementation commitments. And these are commitments that we can make as part of implementing a project, trying to incorporate ways to benefit the communities. So they include things like jobs, training, and labor, where we could talk about hiring practices that benefit the local community, training programs for the local job force, worker retention, business and the economy, things like prioritizing local business and economic development, for example, office space in the local communities or housing opportunities, food service, then construction partnerships, where there may be opportunities to partner with existing local public organizations to provide shared benefits. And a big example that's come up a lot in discussions with the stakeholders is emergency services. So looking at ways that the emergency services that we need to provide to support the construction effort could also provide benefits to the local communities. And then multi-purpose facilities. So there might be things that the construction effort can leave behind to benefit the community. For example, we're looking at park and rides, and those could potentially be left behind as a benefit to the community after. And the other one that comes up a lot is broadband service. We know that that's a major issue in the Delta, and there may be opportunities for joint benefits there as well. Next slide, please. So again, I wanted to highlight that there are three distinct but complementary processes. So the community benefits is not the only effort here. We are first starting with regulatory mitigation, where we will be addressing project-specific impacts related to regulatory requirements. These are required, and this is sort of the base. This is what we have to do sort of at more of a minimum level, although I will say we try in the environmental process to make sure that our mitigation are robust as well. So minimum might not be the right term. Anyway, the next effort is the Community Benefits Program, where we are trying to provide resources to direct benefits towards the communities most impacted by implementation based on community collaboration. And the third thing I wanted to highlight here is an ombudsman program. And the idea here is that we hear a lot that Delta Conveyance is a complicated project. If people are concerned about things, they don't know, they see construction and they don't know what it is. They think that they might be affected by construction. So it might just be questions, it might be claims, but they have a single point of contact, someone who's publicly oriented, who's ready to help answer those questions and address any of those impacts. And if there is a claim, then there is a way to quickly help people through that claims process, which can get a little complicated on the state side. Next slide, please. So this talks about the status and where we're going next. So the first step that we're going to do is we're conducting interviews, both with individuals and small groups. We've got a first round of interviews that we've reached out to people, and we're continuing to try to expand that into broader and broader groups. And we're looking at representatives of environmental justice, tribes, recreation, agriculture, local government, economic development and business, natural resources, legacy communities, and culture and history. We're also looking to make sure that we have representatives that span the Delta geographies. We know that issues in the north are different than the central, are different than the south, and we want to make sure we have that represented as well. And we'll provide a summary of these interviews in aggregate. We're not going to attribute any statements to any individuals, but rather we're going to look at the feedback we receive together. Then after that, we'll use the feedback we received during the interviews to set up a series of public meetings, March through May of this year. And so the topics and the discussion will be based on the interview results, and we'll talk about sort of draft language that we might use for a framework for community benefits and solicit public impact or input. And then from there, we'll use the interviews and the workshops to develop a draft framework that will become an appendix to the draft EIR. And this draft framework will identify next steps and what needs to happen next. It will not be a fully fleshed out community benefits program. It's sort of the framework to get there and what types of things could be included. And so that will be used to continue development over the next several years. Next slide, please. And I wanted to close with some of the core commitments that we're committing to the communities and the participants as we move through this. So the first is that we will be transparent, that this is an open process to collaborate effectively. The second is that we will be constructive. We'll participate in good faith with the community to create a positive legacy. We want this process to be inclusive with broad stakeholder participation to expand the capture of voices. We want this to be fair so that benefits are related to the localized nature of effects. And finally, unconditional, that the benefits are not dependent on support for the project. And I will say we've talked about this with the Stakeholder Engagement Committee of the DCA, and this last one I think was probably the most important thing that we said and that we heard is that this is really important, that we cannot tie this program and its implementation in any way to support for the program. And we really understand that we are asking for people to talk about a project that they don't want to see implemented. And we can't say, we will provide this benefit if you support the project. That's not our goal. We want to talk to everyone. We understand that most people do not support the project, but we're hoping that they can think about ways that we might be able to do this sensitively if it does in fact move forward. And so with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions from members?
This is Daniel, just an appreciation for this good work. I think when we're inside the bubble of water policy and it's so technical and the stakes are so high for so many interests, it's easy to forget just the fundamental nature of water and what it represents as a human right. And so I think this community benefits program is a really exciting part of the work as we kind of open the doors of the conversations to more people whose lives are impacted by it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from members?
Judge, I had a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Can you, Carrie, do you mind repeating or clarifying, just so we understand the source of funds for the community benefit fund, and then whether that's something that's planned to be ongoing or kind of a one-time infusion, or any details that you can provide on that?
The community benefits program would be funded as part of the construction funds. So it would be, we're looking at issuing bonds that would be repaid through the state water project contractors for the totality of the construction funds, and this would be a part of that. In terms of how the funds are available, I think that's something that we really want feedback from the communities on, whether they'd rather have sort of a big amount of funds available at once so they can tackle larger projects, or if it makes more sense to have smaller funds available continually over time. I think we're really open to feedback on that topic.
And any estimates at this point about the size of that fund?
No, at this point, we're really trying to get people to talk to us without focusing on the specific dollars. We'd like to get some initial feedback just in general, and we think that that will help inform that discussion, but we haven't yet spoken about dollars for this.
Thank you.
Judge Damerl, this is Don Natoli. I just had a quick question of Carrie. Carrie, so I know that there's been some outreach to local officials on the community benefits to do some interviews, but just had a question. And this goes back to the creation both of the council and the statute, in 2009 statute that created the conservancy and obviously framed both the council and the commission's roles. In that legislation, there was a Delta investment fund that has never had any dollars attributed to that. Again, that isn't necessarily a responsibility of the proponents of this project, but I guess I'm curious as we look at this question of community benefits. There's been a fund that was at least referenced in its establishment in the statute, which is now nearly 12 years in vintage, and I guess I'm curious as to what linkage there may or may not be to what's contemplated in this program, because that would be following the role of the Delta Protection Commission for the administration, and that was clearly intended but never funded, at least to this juncture. So I guess I'm kind of curious about if there's been any discussion regarding that.
We haven't explored that, but that's certainly something that we'd be interested in feedback on. I think that we see the effort through this community benefits program more specifically tied to Delta Conveyance. So, for example, if the effects are sort of we're really trying to focus on these effects that aren't captured in the environmental impact report. The effects of having a big construction effort in a small rural community, and so we're trying to think about how to focus benefits on those areas and those potentially affected people, resources, et cetera. So it's not necessarily the same purpose as the overall effort. However, it's something that we can hear feedback on and we'd be more interested to discuss.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments or questions from members? All right, Eric, are there any public comments on this item?
Yes, we have two. First is Ocean Reserve. Just 1 second while she comes over.
Hi, this is OSHA. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks. There's nothing on my screen that tells me anything. This is OSHA Reserve, Local Agencies of the North Delta, and just wanted to comment on this item briefly. I've been monitoring the Stakeholder Engagement Committee for many of my clients, and I just want to point out, because of the introduction of these speakers, referenced that the stakeholder group was addressing the issue of siting in response to the requirements, or at least in part in response to the requirements of DPP2, which is to respect local land uses and siting. And perhaps it wasn't intended, but I believe that may have brushed over what is a very important point for Delta interests, which is that with respect to siting, most of the major components of this project have been set and have not been subject to any input from the stakeholders or other members of the public, and in particular, the siting of the intakes, the proposed intakes themselves on the river in this one stretch of the river that is where our legacy communities are located and where there are very sensitive natural resources as well. So I think it would be too broad to say that this group has been, had input on siting. I think there's been input on some particulars of siting that may help reduce impacts on the community, but the overall siting and the overall compliance with DPP2, we do not believe is being addressed by this group or the changes that may be proposed as part of this process. And I know, and also with respect to the Community Benefits Fund, which was just being discussed, the handout that DWR has prepared regarding that fund refers to DPP2, and that this Community Benefits Fund may be part of DWR's proposed compliance with DPP2, but I would submit that providing community benefits in the form of funding really does not speak to respecting local land uses at all. And as they've said, it's separate from mitigation and condition requirements. The other challenge with respect to the Community Benefits Fund is that folks will recall in the last round, the prior version of the tunnel project, California Water Fix, of course, there were many arguments that were never resolved as to the adequacy of the mitigation measures, for instance, on degradation of water quality and many other significant impacts. So I think it's been very difficult to focus on what's the additional increment being provided that's being addressed in Community Benefits Fund, because it seems to assume that mitigation for the environmental impacts, for instance, would be adequate, and that this is above and beyond that. And I think that many of us would disagree with that characterization. For instance, the prior EIR said that there were no significant water quality impacts, and we did not agree with that. Taking half the river would have no impact on water quality in the area, for instance. So I just want to make sure to kind of correct the record from my client's standpoint with respect to what this is all about. And just one last point is with respect to the Bethany Alternative, something that I think the council should keep an eye on with that is that it does concern Delta interests that there would be a proposal that would bypass the South Delta facilities altogether, because the way this project has been proposed is that is the addition of an intake, and that the South Delta would continue to be operated, and that requires through Delta freshwater flows, which also benefit other portions of the Delta, in particular Central and South Delta. And so the Bethany Alternative is concerning in that it no longer relies at all on the existing facilities in the South Delta. And if DWR has an intent to eventually abandon the water quality commitments that were foundational to the approval of the state and federal water projects going back decades, or half a century really, then that needs to be made explicit, because we expect that those promises and those statutory obligations and those legal obligations will be upheld no matter what other facilities may be built in the Delta. Thank you.
Are there any other comments, public comments? Eric?
Yes, we have Gilbert Cosio.
Okay.
Just one second. Oh, sorry about that, Gilbert. I think I accidentally took it off for a second. Are you able to hear us?
Am I on now? Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, Gilbert Cosio, MBK Engineers. I'm an ex officio member of the DCA SEC representing flood control interests. And I wanted to respond to Councilmember Natoli's comments and questions regarding the Twin Cities Road stockpile. One of the issues I brought up at the last DCA SEC meeting, or the meeting before, was the fact that the area north of Twin Cities Road, as Councilmember Natoli realizes, is very sensitive to flooding, especially in the Point Pleasant area. And so one of the things I've asked for is if they could look at the hydraulics in that area and whether this 500-acre stockpile of material could impact some of those hydraulics, which we know have been a thorn in your side for a long time, Supervisor Natoli. So hopefully that can be looked at. And the other comment I wanted to make, is in regard to using that material for levees in the future. We don't know where we're going to be in 20 years or whenever that is that we can use that material and whether it'll be acceptable. But I do know that it will take some environmental effort to address hauling that material a significant distance. We ran into this a few years ago as when the county's regional water treatment plant is expanding. They were going to generate about 2 million yards of material. And we thought that'd be good for levee work. Their EIR covered hauling that material, I don't know, 8 or 10 miles away. And then we'd have to pick it up from there with our own environmental document. And we realized once we looked into it, that was just going to kind of shoot our plan out of the water. It was just going to be so expensive, especially with all the greenhouse gas stuff that all's come up with this truck hauling, that it kind of shot it out of the water. So at some point in the future, it would be nice if DWR, whoever the project proponent is at the time, did offer that up to cover the environmental impacts of hauling that material. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Are there any further public comments?
There's no more public comment.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Carrie and Catherine. We will now move on to agenda item number 8. Are there any general public comments?
There are no general public comments.
All right, then with no further public comments, our next meeting will be February 25, 26 via Zoom. Thank you all. The meeting is now adjourned.